Right.
So I was thrilled.
Right. So now I had heard in Rolling Stone's Random Notes, which was sort of the 2-page spread in the middle of the magazine. I used to read Rolling Stone religiously, and they would have like a news section, and it would tell you little bits and pieces as to what's going on, what's coming up. I remember seeing a photo of Dave, and he was in a hotel that was all a mess. It looked like...
Oh, my God. I remember that.
Right? So
I do, yeah.
And you're like, is that like an old photo or something? And then you start reading the copy, and it starts talking about Dave decided to go up to Vancouver and stay there for 6 months while recording this album with producer Bob Rock. Now, Bob Rock is the producer who did Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood album. He also did Metallica's Black Album, but he did Dave's album in between those two huge albums. So Motley Crue's was 89, came out, Dave came out in 91, and then Metallica's came out later in 91. I think it was somewhere around like August or something like that. But
I thought Bob Rock had done the Metallica album first and then went to Dave's.
No, because Dave's album came out like January of 91. Metallica's album didn't come out until late 91. He had done Bon Jovi's album, Keep the Faith, which came out after Dave. And then he also did, prior to Dave, he did the Kingdom Come album. He was a hot producer at the time, especially coming off Dr. Feelgood, which was a huge sound. Everybody loved the sound of the Dr. Feelgood album. It was a big guitars, thick drum sound. It had that big rock sound. Dave was smart to pick Bob as his producer. Now, he was going back to a guy who knew how to handle the big rock sound, okay? Ted Templeman produced the first two. The second one was produced by Dave. Then Dave was smart enough to realize, I got to get a real good producer on this one. He didn't have Steve around. Steve did a lot of producing on the Skyscraper album. He didn't have Billy around. He had the Bissonette brothers, Greg and Matt, so they were the rhythm section. But he had to hire out. So, what did he do? So, the stakes are high. And Dave is in the rebuilding phase. But it's very clear that this shot is it's like a move on the chessboard. This was a very key move that he was trying to make. And the timing was working against him. Because in 1991, grunge was setting in, and the whole big rock style of excess and over-the-topness is not really the flavor of the day. So what is our hero to do? Well, Dave does what Dave does best. He pivots, right? So he goes from the big band kind of style and flashiness of Crazy from the Heat to the rock'em sock'em power of Eat 'em and Smile to the pop dance rock of Skyscraper. And what's his next move? He goes back to the old rock style with some blues flair, which I thought was a real smart move on his part. And he already had to replace Eddie Van Halen with Steve Vai, and now he's got to replace Steve Vai. So what does he do? He finds Jason Becker, this young guitarist. He's like a wonder kid from the band Cacophony. Dave loves the name of that band because it's got cock in it. That's what he loves. So the... And I'm talking about our Dave. So he... So anyway, he brings on another guitarist. He brings on Steve Hunter, who's a killer player and a writer. Not only that, he's gearing up left and right. So he's got the producer, he's got the two guitarists, he's got the Bissonette brothers, he's keeping Brett Tuggle on keyboards. What else does he do? He hires a team of writers. He's got a whole bunch of writers on this album. He's writing with Robbie Neville, Greg Goldie, Eric Lowen, Preston Sturges, Dennis Morgan, Rocket Richey, and plus the guys in the band like Steve Hunter, Jason Becker, Brett Tuggle, Greg Bissonette, and Matt Bissonette. So they're all working together. So everybody goes up to Vancouver, Canada, and he was living in this seedy motel called the Nelson Place Hotel. I guess it was a hotel rather than a motel, and it's like apparently like a real gritty, dirty place. And when you get into our interview with Steve, he'll give you a little feel for what the place was like. So just to give you a little taste of Mr. Roth here. I'm going to give you a quote, what he said at the time when he was interviewed, right? So he says here, "This place is a combination of New York's 42nd Street and the gorilla exhibit at the Los Angeles Zoo. It's the perfect place to make a rock and roll record. 9 different strip joints, all within walking distance of the hotel. We got a welfare office around the corner, porno stores, Korean delis, bootleg t-shirt shops, and there's a strip joint in the basement called Champagne Charlie's. So we decided to find the place with the most character in the sleaziest lobby. We're paying $15 a night with 1 towel each, but no life insurance. When I first arrived, I expected to see Tom Waits working at the front desk." So that's... And then he goes on to say, "The idea behind staying here is that your environment has an impact on your music. It all stacks up in your subconscious. So we're going for real roots rock. The record's gonna be complete original songs. It'll probably sound a lot like, well, the first Van Halen album." Well, obviously, he was going to go back to his roots. From his quotes there, everything, he kept using the first Van Halen album as an example of what they were going for. What did you think of this direction, Dave?
So anytime anybody compares what they're doing now to something classic,
Yeah, I know.
I'm always like, okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Because it's very tough to, stand up to something like that.
Very difficult,
right?
Yep.
So Dave was going back to his roots, but hindsight being 2020, I don't see this album like the first Van Halen album. I think it's closer to it than, say, Skyscraper is. It's definitely a hard rock album,
Right.
but it's no Van Halen 1.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so, and it was always interesting how Dave was playing the whole seedy motel route.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
Gives you some grit and, gives some hardness to the album and stuff
Right.
like that, and yada, yada, yada. I just wonder if Dave didn't have enough budget to put anybody in a real hotel, and that's why he was, he had everybody staying there. Although to Dave's credit, he stayed there with everybody. It wasn't like he put everybody else in
Oh,
the...
that's true. You know
Right?
him. He's not a fancy kind of guy. He gets down and dirty, so he has no problem with that. So I'll give him credit on that. Now, apparently, Roth had a 20-foot-high portrait of a scantily clad woman with Dave's name emblazed as a tattoo on her chest on the outside wall of the recording studio, Little Mountain Sound Studios. And this is what he says. "It upset some people. I told them 10,000 years from now, when they dig up Vancouver, they can either find a blank white wall in a parking lot and go, 'Lucky we didn't live here back then,' or they can dig up something with a great graphic on it." So the album was originally going to be titled Cutting Out, which is sort of interesting, with a completely different cover. But I guess in 91... the censorship thing was at an all-time high. The cover that he had, we're going to get into exactly what it was, and I'll tell you right in Dave's words here what it was, but today it would have been nothing. It wouldn't even have been a thing. But listen to this. So he says here, "I had come up with an album cover. It was a picture of the gal sitting against an airplane. An airplane was in the background, and it looked like a B-17 bomber. It had a human face on the front cockpit, but it wasn't human. It just looked human. And she was sitting in the front with a little see-through negligee with a pair of scissors. And the name of the album was called Cutting Out. I guess the question in the censor's mind was exactly what was she cutting? The censors are particularly sensitive these days, and I'm not making a political statement. There's millions of others of pictures we could pick. Censorship is an insidious, corrosive thing. It's something that works from the inside out." So they had to scrap the cover and scrap the title. What'd you make of that?
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that before because I always wondered what the original cover looked like. I knew the title.
Right.
But I knew there was some kerfluffing going on about that. So, interesting. Yeah, I guess it was a high time for censorship. But to your point, like now, that would have been...
nothing.
That would have been
It
nothing.
would have been nothing.
So,
it would have been absolutely nothing.
Right.
So now the funny thing is, Dave, so this is strike one. Okay, so we're already striking with strike one here. Strike one, title has to be changed, the cover has to be changed. Now, he puts out his first single, A Little Ain't Enough. I don't know why, but he called the single A Little Ain't Enough, which is like L-I-L apostrophe ain't enough. I don't know why that was different.
Yeah, why is the album title different than the song title?
It's very strange. I don't know if someone's being cutesy here. I don't know what the hell happened, but it was a little odd. So, okay, whatever. So Little Ain't Enough came out, and it was kind of a really big rock splashy song. It's just, all over the place. What did you think of the first song? We're going to get into the album in a bit. So I'm not going to get into the song yet, but what did you think just first impression when you first heard it?
It was definitely like a big rock song. Typical Roth.
Yeah.
And I liked it. Had like that big drum sound.
Yeah.
Guitars were kicking.
Yeah. Just
like Dave was doing what he does best.
Right. Excellent. It's his truth. We'll get right into the album now. We'll get into more of what happened with the album right after that. But the first song, as we just talked about, Little Ain't Enough, right? So I thought this song had brought David Lee Roth kind of back to the big rock sound like we just talked about. To be honest, I think there's a little too much synth on the song. There's a little much layering here. Here's a clip. The synth is not really needed. I think you gotta let the guitar be more upfront. I love the lyrics and the melody, but he's really trying for this big massiveness. You can kind of feel it, There's also proof that Brett Tuggle continues to have a heavy influence over David Lee Roth's music here. Roth makes this work, but it's a little bit overbaked. This song was written by Robbie Nevil and David Lee Roth together. I love the song, but I think it just didn't seem to take off like the way it should have. It went to number 3 on the Billboard mainstream rock charts, but that's the mainstream rock charts. It's not, it didn't get like the big punch that it would have. Now, here's the big problem. The video featured scantily dressed women and oddly dressed little people wearing afro wigs and blackface. Now, this is 91, too. If it was now, we would never forget it. That's the end. So now his video gets pulled from MTV, which is a death sentence. Strike number 2. I mean, that's like, oh, God. I mean, the last thing you want is your big first single to get pulled off MTV in 1991, right? I mean, that is just no bueno, right?
So, like you pointed out, Robbie Nevil co-wrote it. Robbie Nevil, probably best known for his song C'est la vie.
Right. C'est la vie. Yep.
Right. So an interesting pairing there for sure. Yeah, having your single banned from MTV is never helpful. The song, I don't even think it went top 40.
No.
It didn't do, like it made some of the other charts, but it didn't make any of the popular charts. And Dave always needed a single to get the album going. He was always good for a single.
Oh, yes.
And this was the first time in his solo career.
Right.
That the leadoff single did not do well.
Right. All his other singles went bananas. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So he's already starting off a little bit in trouble. I hear what you're saying about Brett Tuggle and the keyboards, but to be honest with you, I think on the whole, for the whole album, I like Brett's keyboards better on this album than I did on Skyscraper.
No, I agree. I just think on this particular song, like it's a rock song. I guess I would have rounded it out with a little more like guitars up front. Like the guitars come soaring through at certain points.
But also the keyboards come soaring through, like on the bridge part, like she's my little baby.
Right.
Well, I can't sing it. That's
true, yeah.
Right? But anyway, but like that part, you hear the keyboards. But I don't feel like they're so overwhelming that they ruin the song. Like I said, Brett's keyboards to me were better on this album because like back in 88, I think Dave was going for like, on some songs, like a total synth sound.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
And don't get me wrong, like Tug is a phenomenal musician.
Amazing.
Keyboardist, guitarist,
Singer.
singer,
Yeah.
right? Like, the guy can do it all.
Yep, absolutely.
But his keyboards on Skyscraper are very much of the time. They probably are on A Little Ain't Enough, the album, but I don't feel like they're so much of the time that they overwhelm the album
No. Yeah.
and ruin